Jonathan Taplin, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today on the program. I'm really looking forward to hearing a little bit more about your book, The End of Reality: How Four Billionaires Are Selling a Fantasy Future of the Metaverse, Mars, and Crypto. This is going to be fascinating, honestly, because I am deeply involved in a lot of these spaces, especially around emerging technology. So that's a few of the ones that I spend a lot of time on. So I cannot wait to hear your perspective on these things. But before we start with that, I would also love to hear a little bit about your background. What led you to this being your third book? So the trilogy almost. So please let us know a little bit about you and what led you to this book, writing this book.
Well, it goes back a while. I mean, I graduated from Princeton in 1969 and went to work for Bob Dylan and the band as their tour manager.
Amazing.
It was a kind of magic time at that point, and rock and roll was an exciting place to be. I then produced a concert for Bangladesh for George Harrison, and then came out to Hollywood in early 1973 and was so naive that I didn't know you weren't supposed to put your own money into making movies. And I invested in a movie with a young editor named Martin Scorsese. It was his real feature. It was called Mean Streets.
Oh, my goodness.
Two young actors, Bob De Niro and Harvey Keitel, and that worked out pretty well. And then I produced The Last Waltz, where I brought the band and Marty together and created, I think, the best music documentary ever made. And then I worked for another 10 years producing movies, and I happened to be at Walt Disney as an independent producer when Saul Steinberg started a corporate raid on Disney. And I got some friends in Texas, the Bass Brothers, to get involved and essentially save the mouse from being broken up.
Okay.
And they paid me as their investment advisor for that transaction.
Wild.
And I was shocked to make more money in 3 weeks than I had made in 5 years. So they suggested I go to work full time for their investment banker, which was Merrill Lynch Capital Markets. And I did. I became vice president of media mergers and acquisitions, and did some transactions like Viacom and Vestron and things like that. And then ultimately got a little bored with that and missed the creative world and went back into the movie business with a German director named Wim Wenders, and made a movie called Until the End of the World, which is a real great kind of science fiction classic. And then produced a lot of documentaries and other things in the 90s, and then founded the first streaming video on demand company, which was called Entertainer, in 1996. So about 8 years ahead of YouTube. And ran that for a number of years. And then in 2002, the big movie studios, which had been supplying us with all the content, decided we were getting a little too big for our britches and cut off all the content deals, just stopped them. So we went from having about 8,000 movies on the service to having about 8.
Wow.
And so had to shut that down, sued all the major studios in federal antitrust court for restraint of trade. And needless to say, couldn't go back to being a movie producer since I was suing all the studios. So the dean of the Annenberg School at the University of Southern California asked me to come teach, and I did. And 3 years later, I won the antitrust suit, so I could afford to stay a teacher, and founded the Annenberg Innovation Lab. And ironically, 2 years later, most of the major movie studios started becoming partners in the Innovation Lab, and did that, and then started writing books. And the first book was called Move Fast and Break Things, and was about Facebook Google and Amazon and how they dominated the content business and were potentially destructive to the democracy. And that was a book that was written in 2015. So it was probably the very first
ahead of its time.
tech, worry book. And then I wrote a memoir of the rock and roll and film business called The Magic Years. And then now the new book is called The End of Reality. And it's about more people that you probably follow pretty closely. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Marc Andreesen, and Peter Thiel. And it's a book that's basically worries about how we're at this seminal moment when maybe technology can actually help solve a lot of the problems of our society. And yet the four richest people in tech are all on very strange transhumanism ideas. I mean, Elon Musk wants us to give him 10 trillion to go to Mars for no reason that I can perceive. Mark Zuckerberg believes the future will be where you will spend 8 or 9 hours a day in the metaverse with a virtual reality helmet on your face. And his reasoning is probably that by 2030, the AI and the robots will be doing most of the work, and most humans will be out of work living on universal basic income, which all four of these guys are heavily promoting. Peter Thiel wants to live to 200, and he gets regular transfusions from 15-year-old boys once a month to help him do that, because the mice in his laboratory at the Methuselah Project that are getting transfusions from younger mice live longer. And so he thinks that'll help him. And then Marc Andreesen is, built both a crypto and a NFT pyramid scheme. I mean, the Guardian reported last week that 95% of the people holding NFT collections, 23 million people, have a zero value on those collections, which they paid millions for. So that Bored Ape that you bought in the fall of 2021 for $50,000, you can't give it away today. So, I mean, that's my basic critique. Let's jump into it, because I know you believe in a lot of this. I just want to give you one quote.
Please.
Sam Altman said 3 weeks ago that the marginal cost of intelligence would fall very close to zero within 10 years. The earning power of many, many workers would be drastically reduced in that scenario. It would result in a transfer of wealth from labor to owners of capital so dramatic that it could be remedied only by a massive countervailing redistribution, universal basic income. That's a pretty stark reality.
It is. There's no question that is. And that is certainly something that I know a lot of people are thinking about and talking about at this point in time. But almost going back to the beginning of what you described was an individual that has a creative at their core. Someone's also inclined to business and building things. And over your life, you had these moments in time where you created something, you built something, and then the big monster came in, for lack of a better phrase, and sort of disrupted that, took that away, and said, "No, you can't do this anymore." So you had these bouts of, and a lot of people have been through this, bouts of being a small business or enterprise or whatever, creative enterprise, and all of a sudden the big group comes in and takes it away. Which is, I know what you're saying. These four individuals are very powerful, have tons of money and a lot of clout. So what I would offer up as a thought that I'd love to sort of pursue with you is, The essence of decentralization with blockchain should disrupt that idea, should allow for people globally around the world who have ideas, have issues with access to money via banks or IP. So, be it they want to create their own new YouTube or they want to create music, any of those types of things, leveraging AI, they could now create new songs very quickly, whether you consider that creative or not. New scripts for movies, same sort of thing. And I know that was a big issue with regard to the strike recently. But when you're able to leverage this technology, you can actually stamp it. You can create a particular hash that allows you to make sure that this is now yours, and you can create a smart contract that allows you to, going forward, get paid out on that, whatever it is. The last thing I'll say about this, because you mentioned the NFTs. So yes, NFTs took off like anything else in the beginning. It peaked and it's come down, but that's just the beginning in my vantage point. The art, the goofy pictures of Bored Apes, crypto punks, these types of things. Yes, people spent a lot of money on them. They have come down significantly, but the beginning of NFTs is the idea of asset ownership. So you could make an NFT out of your house, your car, or anything else. You want to tokenize whatever you want in the world. You can now do that as long as regulation gets a little more clear. So what are your thoughts on those concepts?
Okay, so this is a very big subject. So let's go back to the beginning. I mean, I'm a lot older than you are, and I know that, Vince Cerf is a friend of mine. A lot of the people that were at the very beginning of the creation of the internet. I mean, I know Stuart Brand personally. I mean, believed that somehow they were going to democratize communication and media. So as they were building it using army money, right?
Right.
DARPA.
Yes.
And they didn't ask for a patent on HTML or TCP/IP or any of those things. Just they were academics, and they built it because they were just had this incredibly utopian idea that somehow a world which you don't remember, but I do, where there were just 3 television networks and that was it, would somehow change. But that turned out to be a total dream because, first off, the government protected the internet in such a way and basically deregulated in such a way that predatory contracts and ways of doing things became the norm. And the internet became much more centralized than anyone could ever imagine. I mean, there is an antitrust trial going on today in Washington with Google, and Google has 91% market share.
Right.
Never in the history of American business has one business had that. At its height, Standard Oil had 68% market share, right? And we broke them up. Okay. So Mark Zuckerberg owns 4 of the top 5 social networks in the world. It's Elon Musk is the owner of Twitter and can do whatever he wants. Yesterday he said he was getting rid of the election integrity unit because it was causing problems with elections. I mean, it's just nonsense. So the question you need to ask is, how does it become so centralized so quickly? And partially the reason is the government gives them a liability shield. So safe harbor. So, Smartmatic and those other voting machines, Dominion, can sue Rupert Murdoch for libel and win a judgment of $780 million. But there was far more libelous information on Twitter and Facebook about those voting machines. But you can't sue them. They have a liability shield that nobody else in American business does. Clorox doesn't The News Corp doesn't. The New York Times doesn't. So there's no, Tim Snyder. There's an epigram at the beginning of my book. Is Tim Snyder says, Yale professor says, to abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then all is spectacle. The biggest wallet pays for the most blinding lights. So these guys are the biggest wallets paying for the blinding lights, and they have abandoned truth. And so now we're left in a world where, on one hand, 70% of the Republican Party believes Donald Trump won the 2020 election. Like, what world are they living in, right? So on the other side of that notion of what's true and what's not, Marc Andreesen says, quote, reality has had 5,000 years to get good and is clearly still woefully lacking for most people. We should build, and we are building, online worlds that make life and work and love wonderful for everyone, no matter what level of reality deprivation they find themselves in. I mean, I can't even finish that quote without laughing. What does he mean by reality deprivation? Is some person sitting at home with no job, playing video games for 12 hours a day and living, with a addiction to methamphetamine? Is that person reality deprived? Probably.
Right. So, well, there's a lot to unpack through what you just went through as well. I think fundamentally what I'm trying to focus in on is that because I think in some of what your book outlines, it's really about opportunity. And it sounded like there's less opportunity than there used to be, and that's the part that I'm trying to grapple with, because it seems from my vantage point that the internet, be it the beginning or now, it's still allowing people around the world to compete at levels that they never were able to do before, by leveraging tools that are there.
But that's just not true. There's never been a more concentrated set of businesses than the internet businesses. And by the way, as AI, and especially generative AI, because it's so damn expensive to create and to have the computing power to do it, the people that dominate now will continue to dominate. There's a reason why OpenAI took billions of dollars from Microsoft. It needed money to compete. And so there's no reason to think that Google, Meta, and Microsoft, and maybe Elon's going to figure out a way to get in there if he can screw with the way it's regulated, which he's trying. They will be the world dominators, and there's not going to be any competition. Don't have any illusions. If I came to you, Joseph, and said, "Hey, I want you to invest in a new search engine, and we're going to go up against Google, and we're going to kick their butt because it's better technology," you would throw me out of the room. You'd say, "Are you crazy?"
So I see what you're saying, and I understand the aspects of the detriments that we're seeing with regard to social media and how it's affecting people all over the world mentally. There's no question. That's something that we're all still grappling with. We're only 10-ish years into this, where people are like trying to understand, how do kids deal with this? How do we deal with this? How much time should we spend on all those types of things? That I think will be solved in time. The part that I'm really focusing on is there are disruptive technologies out there that could do away with Twitter. It could do away with what Google's doing with regard to search. That could do away with cloud, that all of those powers generally control. If you're familiar with Ethereum, it's basically a platform that allows for people to build anything, any one of those applications on top of. So we're at the very early days of where I could build a brand new cloud-based system that any device you have, be it my phone, your computer, you allow, and this, imagine 10 billion devices around the world all connected to this, and you would get paid out on it because if you wanted to save information to the cloud, you'd get paid a little partition of your phone or your computer would serve as this grand cloud. Same thing for processing power. You can also decentralize a Twitter, and they're working on that right now. All of these things are coming about, and those companies are actually very nervous about this sort of technology because it could, in 5 years' time, affect the way that they work. So it's a foundational change that's out there through the exponential growth of technology that people are really looking at.
Okay, so Joseph, I'm not a Luddite. I actually see real technological uses of blockchain, for instance, with a tool that IBM built for Maersk, the big
Right.
ship company, right? The
Sure.
container company. So now the bankers who finance the shipping, the shippers, the customers who are waiting for the ship to come across the ocean, all of them using blockchain can trace the chain of custody of where the container
Right.
is at any one time. Very useful piece of technology. I'm all for it. But to say that, for instance, Ethereum or Bitcoin as a transaction medium for normal commerce is ridiculous because it's just useless compared. I mean, Visa can do about 1 million transactions a minute easily, sometimes as many as 10 million. There's no way
It's happening. So
it
so
it
it absolutely is happening.
it cannot do it at speed and at scale in any way. And
It,
so, I mean, Ecuador tried to convert their whole thing to a Bitcoin system, and it was the worst failure in the world. It didn't. It not only did it not work, it lost people lots of money, and people are pissed off.
Yeah, I think you're referring to El Salvador, and yes, they
El
have
Salvador.
Bitcoin Beach,
Sorry.
and it is a fascinating experiment that they are working on right now, and they basically created their own wallet that allows for people, and they forced that on people. So that wasn't the best rollout of that, and that's just Bitcoin. So that's a currency, so a digital currency. Ethereum is basically an entire, and there's a lot of other blockchains out there that are trying to replicate it, but they're not there. The biggest organizations around the world, PwCs, the EYs, government agencies globally are all using Ethereum at level 1 or level 2. So level 2 will allow for the transactions to compete against Visa. So Visa, the biggest banks in the world, are all starting to leverage this technology because they absolutely realize that it's going to have an impact on the way they do business, and they're going to have to pivot in that direction. So the way that we're paying fees for Visa right now are 3%, or American Express is like 4 or 5% for every transaction. That will be decreased by significant margins. It'll allow for people in different parts of Africa or Central America or all over Asia to be able to send money to each other, to be able to have the NFTs that represent land. 80% of the world's land isn't deeded. We're used to that in the United States or Europe, whatever the case is, but 80% of the world's land isn't deeded. So once you're able to have an NFT that represents your plot of land, that empowers people to be able to leverage, create loans, or whatever the case is, that allows for so much potential for people. And you coming from the arts, you're already seeing people like Rihanna, who basically took her music and she tokenized it so that when she was able to sell this stuff, people were able to actually take and participate in that and ownership of it and then profit from it. It's
Okay,
going to be
so
significant for your world.
I mean, look, I don't know much about African land transactions, but I know a lot about the arts.
Yeah.
And the notion that technology, Andreesen last week said, AI is going to save the entertainment business. It's going to make it much more efficient. Okay, so that's the most stupid thing I've heard someone say in 5 years. You can go down to the Bob Dylan Museum, as I have done in Tulsa, and you can see 10 drafts of Like a Rolling Stone, the song. Art is not efficient. AI is not going to create art. I'm sorry. AI thinks all the world's knowledge is already out on the internet, and all it has to do is pull it in and remix it and give you something. So I can actually go on Google's LLM music model and ask it to write me a Bob Dylan song, anti-war song from 1966.
Right.
And it will write something that sounds somewhat like Bob Dylan, and it will be the most banal thing you've ever imagined. It's AI is never going to create Like a Rolling Stone. AI is never going to create Hamlet. And the writer's strike, which just settled, was held up because the studios, especially a company like Marvel, which relies on formula stuff, wanted to feed all the writers' scripts into an LLM to train it how to write a great screenplay, right? Without compensation, because they claimed they already owned the scripts, so they could put them in. And so here's how the movie business was going to work in their mind. Usually it takes 6 to 9 months to get a first draft screenplay and costs about $500,000 to $750,000 for a first class writer, right? So in their imagination, instead of a screenwriter, you would have a prompt writer, and he would write a 3-paragraph. Okay, Captain America is going to meet the Hulk in Iceland, and then in the second act, Black Widow is going to come in and save their butts, and whatever. And then in a day, the generative AI was going to turn out first draft screenplay. Okay, so now they got a problem. They got a screenplay, but they can't copyright it because the copyright office won't give copyright to a machine-made something. So now they're going to hire some poor, out-of-work screenwriter to punch it up, right? To put a little humor in, make it a little more human, and then put his name on it. And now they can copyright it. So in 3 weeks, they've got a screenplay. It's not going to work. That's not the way great stuff works. And all it is going to do is put out tons and tons of mediocre crap, whether it's music, whether it's films. It's going to be a disaster.
So like what we see on a lot of Netflix shows. So
Not
what we see
even
now already.
Not even to mention what it's going to do to our social media and politics in the next year. I mean, I was at a dinner last night where somebody who is a very high level technologist said that the possibility of AI creating disinformation at scale that would have made, Prigozhin's Internet Research Bureau look like a kiddie shop is going to be totally there. And there are people at Bellingcat who are worried that Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are going to give Putin their best AIs for the election.
Yeah, and I realize that we're almost out of time, and I could literally go hours with you here. One thing that I just want to say, I absolutely appreciate what you're saying. I do, 100%. I've spent the last 10 to 15 years talking with people just like you, which I've been very fortunate to be able to do. But I'm a futurist. I've spent a lot of time with the technology, and my vision of what you just described in terms of it not ever reaching the level of a Bob Dylan or a Scorsese or whatever the case is. I sadly, and I hate saying this because I love the arts. I love music beyond belief. I love film. But I firmly believe that it will, in the next several years, maybe 5 years' time, actually absolutely compete against that sort of thing. There's no question in my mind that the more information that it's fed, I know what they've asked for and what they're now receiving um, after the strike. But there's other people that will use that, and they'll still grab these scripts and they'll still look at the 500 songs that U2's produced and be able to produce something that sounds very similar or better, and could potentially be more imaginative. It'll be back and forth, an iterative process. Firmly believe that unfortunately it's going to impact people dramatically in the arts, as well every single industry in the same sort of disruptive way. But we'll see.
So are you and your friends thinking about what we do when it does disrupt, as Altman said,
Yeah.
80% of the kind of, and it's not just Amazon warehouse workers being replaced by robots. It's radiologists being replaced by AI.
It's everything.
Lawyers. It's everywhere.
It's twofold. One, from any, and I've always said this, any new technology that comes out, there are things that we don't even know about that humans will help out with, that will create new businesses, new business models, new areas of growth. This time, I'm not as sure. I think there still will be areas of growth. I think that it's definitely going to be going back to what you said earlier. The universal basic income is going to be something that is going to be needed across the globe. It is a massive shift that is more difficult to predict than anything I have ever seen. And you're kind in giving me credit for I'm older than you, you may think. So I've been around for a while and I've seen a lot of the things that you were discussing. And this is one time that is extraordinarily special, frightening. There's a lot of potential. And hopefully there will be a time for people benefiting from this stuff. But there is a lot of concern across the board. The last thing is to say is that, one kind of cool thing, but again, to your point, is I'm actually going to be a judge in Dubai for one of the first, I know there's others out there, AI film festival. And already they have hundreds of applicants who weren't even in the film industry. I mean, they're appreciative of arts. Maybe they did things on their own, but now they can create generative film scripts, whatever it is that they want to build into this film. And it's wild to watch, but it's opened up the floodgate for people who may not have had access to things before, but now they
I,
can leverage it.
I really pity you having to watch all those
Oh,
AI.
it's a lot. I know it's gonna be a lot.
You're going to want to, by the second day, you're going to want to shoot yourself,
The
because
short films. So luckily
it
they're not.
doesn't even matter. You're going to it's, I promise you, this is 90% of this stuff is not going to pass the who cares test.
I think you're probably
Someone
right.
told me when people first told me that there were 400 hours of content being uploaded to YouTube every minute, and that out of that would come a new Scorsese, a new Francis Coppola. It never happened. I love that you're optimistic and you're young and you hope that all these technologies will do wonders. But I see Blade Runner, man. I see Blade Runner. And
Fair enough.
I don't think the Republicans would ever pass a universal basic income. It goes against their whole principle of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and self responsibility.
Sure.
And it's not until the fucking pitchforks are out and they're coming after McCarthy's house in Bakersfield that he's all of a sudden going to get religion.
No, you're no, I appreciate that very much. Jonathan, I really, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for the entertaining dialogue and debate here. It's been great.
Great. Yeah, it's fun.
Thank you so much. And just to repeat, your book, is it out now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so it's out, and the title of it is.
The end of reality.
All right, excellent.
Four
And
billionaires
the
are
subline is how 4 billionaires are selling a fantasy future of the metaverse, Mars, and crypto.